In the last video, we took a look at the Asus motherboard, the ROG Strix Z790E Gaming Wi-Fi 2, and also the components right over here on this awesome setup, which I will leave some links down below so that you can have an idea. But today we are going to focus on the CPU. This is the i9 14900K, and I did run a lot of tests in terms of performance and also power consumption. And I did run through Geekbench 6, Cinebench 2024, gaming, video editing and rendering, as well as energy consumption, all these tasks. So if you want to have an idea of the kind of performance that you can get with a system like this and the power consumption that you will have, then stay tuned and let's go straight for it. And if you are assembling or you did already assemble your computer setup and you still haven't activated Windows 10 or Windows 11, don't forget to check out KeysFan, where you can find budget official OEM keys at an affordable price and with the coupon code that you can see on screen and down below on the video description. Now, looking at the performance and starting with Geekbench 6, we got a single core score of 3000 and a multi-core score of 19,549, which is impressive for this CPU. Looking at Cinebench 2024, single core score 129 and multi-core score 2026, which according to Cinebench 2024 is the fastest CPU on the market right now. Now there is one question, which is on the benchmark I don't see the latest M2 Ultra, which is a chipset which will be probably a bit higher than this one, but the result is not there. We will have to wait a few weeks to compare it. At this moment, it's just the fastest one. Now, looking also at some gaming results with 3D Mark times SPI Extreme 4K, we got 11,071, and here we need to pay attention that these results are mainly because we have a dedicated GPU, in this particular case the Asus ROG Strix RTX 4070 Ti, but we wanted to test if we had any kind of bottleneck on the CPU, which we don't at all. I also did the 3D Mark Speedway 4K and we got a result of 5,378. Now, in terms of editing videos and rendering with DaVinci Resolve, with a simple timeline of 4K containing just the A roll and also a few B rolls, or even a more complex project like the video that I created a few weeks ago featuring the Hohem MT2 with multiple sections of multiple cameras, some filters, some transitions, the Intel i9 14900K seems to handle it just like butter, no issues whatsoever. We will talk about power consumption in just a few moments. In terms of rendering, when we are talking about a 4K timeline, no special effects whatsoever, just a simple with B-rolls and so on. We did render a 9 minutes in 5 minutes and 30 seconds. While rendering the timeline, a more complex timeline, 4K 16 minutes, took only 8 minutes. And this just means that regardless of the effects and everything that we put in, the CPU and GPU were able to handle everything and gave us a result which is simple to read. The rendering time will be half of the time that you have on your timeline. And if you work with lower resolutions like 1080, then the performance will increase and we will have lower times. Now let's take a look at the power consumption. And the power supply that I'm using is a Seasonic Focus Plus Gold 850 watts. Now in idle we are getting 62 to 65 watts, which is awesome for this system. If we watch a YouTube video, we will get roughly 75 to 80 watts. Copying files between a external and internal SSD, around 80 watts. Cinebench with one core only, simulating that we are using an app using just one core at its maximum. We could get 111 to 118 watts. Cinebench multi-core, pushing all the cores, 24 cores, 32 threads to the maximum, and this is a good test to isolate the power consumption of the CPU. Now, the maximum that I could observe was about 476 watts up to 500 watts. And also, while doing the test on 3D Mark, and here we are mixing the GPU and the CPU, simulating that we are playing a game. On 3D Mark Speedway 4K, we could get about 365 watts of power consumption, while on 3D Mark Time Spy 4K, we could get around 380 to 525 watts with the CPU and GPU. And this depends on the game that we are playing, the scene that it has to render. The more complex, the more it will need to effort on the GPU and the CPU, and it will consume a little bit more, but it will handle everything. Now, looking at editing videos, which is something that you might want to do with a setup like this, I did 3 kinds of tests, or I did measure, which is the playback, the scrolling of the timeline, and also the rendering. Now, when we have the app open, in this particular case DaVinci, we will get an idle consumption of about 62 to 65 watts, which is the same that we have while the computer is in idle. But if we start playing back, I was observing about 325 watts. And if we scroll the timeline, depending on the scene that we have, more complex or not, the average was about the 300 watts, sometimes a bit below, sometimes a bit above, but it depends. And then the final step, which is the rendering. I did test it out on rendering the timeline with 16 minutes, the one that we talked before, the more complex timeline, and I also measured at the same time with my phone, so I'll try to give you an image that will give you time enough to see the different steps of that rendering, but I can't put it so fast that you can't see the numbers. Now, what I did observe was that the consumption was about 370 watts up to 460 watts. And this will depend on everything that we have on our timeline. And these are the results of the performance and power consumption of the i9 14900K, and hopefully these were useful to you, either to decide if this is the CPU that you want for your setup or not, if it has enough performance and if it consumes the power that you were expecting. If that was the case, don't forget that usual thumbs up right over there, which is really appreciated on this side of the screen. My name is Roberto, and as always, I'll see you on the next one.